The real January 6 numbers. We've got two fictions we need to destroy today, and we're going to do it using the January 6 government case records, filings, numbers, dispositions, all of the metrics that came from the DOJ themselves. Two things I want to make sure we're clear on. One, it was fictional. The January 6 was mostly violent. The numbers are going to show that. We're going to look at the amount of cases that were disposed of as felonies, as misdemeanors, and so on. We're also going to smash the idea that January 6 was a major event, just in terms of volume. It was actually quite a small event, as we'll take a look at and see. But where are we getting this data from? We're going to go through a spreadsheet in some detail here. You can see I spent some time assembling these numbers. This is what is coming up. I'm going to walk us through it. But first, we have to understand where these numbers came from before they make any sense. And they come directly from the Department of Justice. They posted a 24-month update. They say 24 months since the greatest attack on democracy since the Civil War, right? They say, hey, 24 months have happened. The government continues to investigate all of this. It cost them $2.7 million, so on. They say under continued leadership, we are investigating and compiling the cases. Here's what we have found. So they've been working on this for 2 years. And just to make sure we're understanding this, this is dedicated, 8, 9 full select committee hearings. We have national news coverage for basically 2 full years. We've got investigations, hundreds or thousands of DOJ employees all working on this. And here's what they've got after 2 years. And now this might sound like a big number to you. I'm going to show you what a joke this is in a minute. Arrests. More than 950 defendants have been arrested. Okay, that's the top line number. So if you're going to remember any number here, it's 950 defendants have been arrested. More than 284 of those defendants have been charged with assaulting, resisting, or impeding. And that is what we're going to call the sort of the low-level violent crimes. All right, so just you can do the simple math here if you're following along at home. 950 total crimes, 284 of those were so-called violent. Now, within that, there's a subcategory of those 284 crimes. They say 99 of those were deadly or involved a dangerous weapon. All right, so now you can see we just follow the numbers around. 99 individuals who have been charged with a more serious offense. So you can see we have the rest of the numbers here. We have 860 defendants who were charged with remaining on restricted federal building or grounds, 91 defendants with a deadly weapon, and so on, right? This is a big list of numbers. Now, what we're going to do is translate all of these numbers over to this document. And in this document, we're going to see how this all makes sense. Because essentially what they're telling us in this document, in what they release publicly, they're telling us, we have done so much work on this case. This was the worst thing that's ever happened. And look at all of this stuff that we've accomplished. Almost 1,000 prosecutions, over 99 individuals with deadly and dangerous weapons, and so on, right? 50 defendants with conspiracy and 484 individuals have pled guilty. Now, when we just transmute all of this over, when we just take all of this from the government and we try to make sense of it, here is what we find, my friends. Now, for some time, I have been wanting to know what the conclusion of all of the January 6 criminal cases were, because then we can do some really good analysis. We're going to start right now, even though we're only halfway done. You see this chart? Total open cases, we saw were about 950 open cases. And so here, that means about closed were 484. And I sort of reverse engineered that number. So you can see this is what the pie chart looks like. Of all the January 6 cases, we're about halfway through. About half of them are closed, about 50.9% are closed, and 49.1% are open. And I want to pause on this for a moment. The reason they are slow rolling these cases, in my opinion, is because they don't want to get to this conclusion. They don't want us to see what these final numbers are. Because if we do, as you're going to see, they're starting to look really bad for them, right? They know these numbers. They're prosecutors. They've got these numbers in their system somewhere. They know what they're doing. So if we're about halfway through, we should be asking ourselves, man, I'm sure they prosecuted a ton of insurrectionists and seditious conspirators and all sorts of violent criminals and all of that stuff, right? Well, let's take a look at the breakdown. If you translate all of those charges that came over from that other spreadsheet, from the other post, here is what we see for total crimes. If we break up the category into violent, sort of a serious violent crime and a less serious violent crime, we know that there are some that they say have involved weapons or serious injury. The weapons, in some cases we've seen, were water bottles, flagpoles, other things that were kind of ridiculous and not really weapons, but they call them weapons. So we have the low-level assault, anything that is impeding, resisting, assaulting. I think within that, you have a subcategory of the more serious charges. And remember that these numbers are not going to add up to 100 because you can be charged with multiple crimes. So you can be charged with, for example, entering the Capitol. You could enter the Capitol with a weapon and then assault an officer and then charge somebody with assaulting the officer with the weapon that you brought in, right? So like you could have these 4 charges all stacked up back to back. But anyways, this is how they organize them into the different categories. And so you can see basically this is how it breaks down. Now I know this chart probably looks a little bit complicated, but the bulk of these charges, over half of these in this big brown box area, are just simple entering the Capitol charges, right? Just entering the Capitol. It is the massive bulk of all of the charges. 860 crimes out of 950 got charged with entering the Capitol, right? And huge portions of those were just not violent at all. We also had conspiracy, which is a very broad catch-all criminal charge. It basically includes anything. Corruptly obstructing a proceeding. Also, right, basically these things can stack on top of one another. Like if you enter the Capitol, you're obstructing a proceeding, aren't you? Well, yeah, because you're standing there and they are not doing the proceeding. So they sort of all stack on top of one another. And this is how it breaks down. The big bulk of these, as you can see, is entering the Capitol. Now, in order for this to make sense, we need to just pull out essentially all of the things that are clearly not violent, right? Not violent offenses. And identify the things that are violent because we want to shatter this myth that this was a massive violent incident. So here we know that we've got 99 that were violent involving a weapon. We've got 284 that were sort of the broader, lower level violence. And if you put that in a pie chart, my friends, this is what it looks like. So if we give the government the benefit of the doubt and we say, all right, look, we're going to count all the violent crimes, including the subset of the more violent crimes as violent, then it would be 284 cases out of 950 that were actually violent, which would make this 23% of the total crimes violent, right? So that's small. That's at the upper end. It's a fourth. That's if you give them sort of the full leeway, the full benefit, and you say, we're going to give them more violent crimes than maybe I think they should get. So if you also think about the lower end of this, and we say, we're only going to count the serious injury crimes and the weapons crimes as the violent offenses, that's now 99 out of 950. It's less than 10%. That's the point that Tucker was making. And that's by the DOJ's own numbers, because none of these other crimes are violent crimes. All right, entering the Capitol wasn't a violent crime. Entering the Capitol with a weapon, you're going to presume that they also have the weapon, right? So these numbers are hard to capture because you could be charged with multiple crimes, but these are really the rough numbers. Pay attention that nobody has been charged with insurrection, not a single person, not one insurrection charge ever. So I don't know why they keep saying that. 50 people charged with conspiracy. Obstructing is not violent. Theft of property is not violent. Destruction of government property is not violent. Those are all criminal damage charges, about 6 to 3% of the total criminal charges. And so really the only violent crimes, if you give the government maximum benefit, was at the high end about 23% violence, and on the low end, 9.4% violence. And it's probably dramatically lower than that because even the weapons that they categorize, even the things they categorize as a weapon, right, were water bottles and flagpoles and things like that. So this number could theoretically be much lower than that, depending on how you wanted to interpret this. We're just taking the default DOJ interpretations. We're just saying, okay, we'll just take whatever you say and we'll just follow along with that. So it's kind of amazing, isn't it? Really only about 99 people out of 1,000 have been charged with a violent weapon crime, less than 100 people on J6. And if you wanted to say, even broader than that, it's about less than 300. Wow. All right. For one of the worst things that's happened since the Civil War, that doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? Now we carry on. Maybe my numbers are wrong. Maybe this is, in fact, involves a ton of other felonies or other serious crimes. But no, according to the DOJ's own numbers, out of the people who have taken a guilty plea, the people who have resolved their cases, only 119 of them out of the 484 have pled guilty to a felony. Okay, 1/4 of all the cases that have been resolved are felonies. 3/4 are misdemeanors, which are minor compared to a felony. Again, it would be like a criminal trespass at a bar. It would be like refusing to leave after you've been asked to leave. It would be like breaking, a glass or a table or knocking over something at a bar, criminal damage, breaking a machine. 3/4 of these all got pled down into misdemeanors. Only 119 at this point have pled to felonies. Now, the sentences are even harsher because, as you can see, this pie chart should sort of resemble what the penalties, right? If 1/4 of the people are getting felony plea deals, they should get felony penalties, right? And if 3/4 are getting misdemeanor plea deals, they should get misdemeanor penalties, right? But when you go down to the incarceration, you're really only seeing about, you're seeing about 43% of them are in fact getting incarcerated. So, just from rough numbers, you'd like to see that maybe at, if you wanted to correlate incarceration to felonies, that incarceration number should be closer to, let's say, 25% to match this number, but it doesn't. So the incarcerated number feels like it's a lot heavier, and the people who are only getting probation are about 1/3 who are not going to any type of incarceration. 19% are getting home detention after a period of incarceration. So in other words, 3/4 are getting misdemeanor, but only 1/3 are getting probation. This number should be closer to 3/4. So it's absolutely just not even close. It's the plea deals are not bad for the defendants, but the penalties are bad for the defendants. Now, with all of that being said, I know this is a ton of numbers, right? I know we're looking at a number of pie charts and numbers, and typically people's eyes glaze over at this point in time. But the point that I'm trying to make here is this all culminates in about 950 cases, okay? And 950 cases over 2 years for the entire DOJ, the entire FBI, is literally a joke, okay? It's hysterical. And so here's what I wanted to go over. Now, when we add all of this stuff up together, most of these cases are pretty minor cases, as you can see. About 84% or 90% of them are not violent at all. About half of the cases are closed. 400 and something cases have taken plea deals. And so we've got criminal trespass cases. We've got criminal damage cases. We have, kind of like analogs to public nuisance and protest, right? All these different things that are basically minor. So when you are charging somebody with a crime, you have elements of the crime. You have to sort of check the boxes off. So the Capitol Hill trespass is not that much different than an Old Town trespass. It's just in the Capitol building. It's not that different at all. It's pretty much the same elements. Is a person here? Yeah. Are they allowed to be here? No. Okay. Well, then that's the kind of the law there. You kind of broke the law. Now, the J6 cases have one extra element, which is we have an identification component. We have a difficult time identifying everybody because people were flying from all over the country, and there was, sort of an investigatory period where they had to track people down. But that's it. Once they got ID and identification, basically they send a bunch of FBI agents on field trips. Well, why don't you go to Arizona and hang out there for a little bit? Hey, go hunt some insurrectionists while you're out there. And then they go find them and they drag them back. And that's it. They have an ID component and they have the rest of the charges. So every time you hear this complicated, most complicated investigation and all of that, it was Where's Waldo? That's all they were doing. These aren't crimes of the century. Even a DUI case is more complicated than these cases. Ask a government prosecutor about gas chromatography, okay? Ask them about mass spectrometry. Ask them about any of those things and see what happens with their eyeballs. Doesn't work out so well for them. This is just trespass and disorderly conduct stuff. It's like a joke. Okay, so you get the point. Now, all of this, it really is a very minor number of cases, because here's what I want to share with you. I want to show you exactly how this works The government has turned this into a giant hysterical mess. And according to USA Today, the DOJ back on March 28th, 2022, they requested more prosecutors, okay? 131 more prosecutors for the January 6 cases as the investigation continues, right? 131 prosecutors? Holy crap, for 950 cases? What? That seems like a lot. It's like 10 cases per prosecutor or something? Like what? And then it's more prosecutors. So we have to ask ourselves, how many prosecutors were already working on this? So all of this comes out. They wanted $37 billion. And Lisa Monaco, who really is running the DOJ, she said, regardless of whatever sources we get, let me be very clear. We're going to hold these perpetrators accountable. More than 700 people have been charged and so on. Okay. So now let's add this number into our spreadsheet. We take 131 additional prosecutors. Okay. They're asking for another 131. And we don't know how many prosecutors were already on the case. So let's ask ourselves, how much of a growth would 131 prosecutors be, additional prosecutors? How much would that be, like a doubling of the prosecutor's office? So let's say it was literally a doubling of the people who were focused on January 6th. So that would mean that would be a 100% increase. And that would mean that if the original number of prosecutors was 131 and they added another 131, we would have a total of 262 prosecutors on the case. Now that's being extremely generous, right? I don't think that they added and doubled the size of the team or want to double the size of the team. I think it's probably just like a 25% increase, right? You're just saying, oh, we're going to go add in another 130. So let's say it's a 25% increase of the January 6th team. That means that 131 additional prosecutors would mean that the base layer of prosecutors was about 524 if it was a 25% increase. Okay, we're working backwards here. That's all we got. That means that there's a total of 655 prosecutors that would be working on this case or on the January 6 cases. And that is not that does not sound like an unreasonable number, because remember, the DOJ has 115,000 employees. So would they even dedicate 1% of people to the most egregious attack on American democracy since the Civil War? You have to imagine it's like at least 1%, which would be like 1,500 people, right? So, okay, 655 prosecutors seems like a generous number. It's probably closer to 1,000 or 1,500 on all of these cases. And my friends, when you think about that, when you think about 655 prosecutors for 950 cases, 950 criminal cases, do you understand how insane this is? It's almost a 1-to-1 ratio. In fact, it's a 1.45 ratio just with those numbers. That means that every prosecutor is working on 1.5 cases for 2 years. You see how insane this is? It is insane, because if you take a look at the DOJ manual, then what they'll tell you, if you go through this long document, this was drafted back in December 2007, a census of state court prosecutors and prosecutors in state courts. And they say here that state prosecutors' offices, if you read through all of these numbers, I'll just want to share with you what the average felony prosecution caseload looks like. Yeah. Offices in districts with more than 1 million residents, they close 4,500 felony cases every year. Every year, no problem. And prosecutors, in fact, they can also have a caseload of, I think I saved it somewhere. They have a caseload of 94, which is the average. There it is. In 2007, prosecuting attorneys in offices in districts with 100,000 to 250,000 residents, they closed an average of 121 felony cases each. You see that? Every year, 121 a year. The full-time caseload per prosecuting attorney across all full-time offices was 94 felony cases. 94 felony cases. So that is the average volume for a standard prosecutor. 94 felony cases. In this case, according to their requests, according to their convictions, it's 1.45 cases per prosecutor. It's not even close to being anything that is big. If you talk to any prosecutor and you said, hey, we're going to hire you and you're going to work on 1.5 cases every year, they would laugh. Now, this leaves out some parts, right? It does leave out the fact that there's investigations that go into these things. But the point is, the numbers don't add up. There's 950 cases. There's got to be somewhere around 1,000 prosecutors. It's about a 1-to-1 case per prosecutor. It is not the crime of the century at all. In fact, somewhere around 10 to 20% of the cases were actually violent if you give the government the benefit of the doubt on the violence and sort of look at everything as default violent. So these numbers will just show you. And as more and more of these cases get disposed of, we're going to see, I think, probably these pie charts continue to squeeze up in our favor. The vast majority of these were not violent at all. The vast majority of these were people just walking around the Capitol. Even the charges confirm that. Huge portions of the pie chart are entering the Capitol, obstruction, conspiracy, entering the grounds. So whenever you hear them tell you that this is the most complex investigation ever, if it's complicated for the DOJ and their 115,000 employees to prosecute 1,000 cases, we need to get a whole new DOJ. Probably should do that anyways. But it's embarrassing that they can't handle this. Any local city prosecutor's office could handle 950 cases in 2 years. It's a total joke. So I don't know what you see on the TVs. I don't know what all of those rioting people were, apparently, according to this, is about 300 of them were the violent ones. And I don't doubt for a minute that the FBI didn't catch all of them. They have been playing Where's Waldo for the last 2+ years, and they're going to make sure they get every single person. So the fact these numbers are looking so bad for them really shows and illustrates how bad this was for them. They wanted to turn this into the crime of the century. It just isn't. And the numbers confirm. So we'll, of course, continue to cover January 6th. Thank you for joining us as we do. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and we'll look forward to seeing you, my friends, on the next one.